Hi guys, welcome to the Lever Studios. Let's get to talk about Room and Rxjava. This is a super library that we're going to be using in this application, and we're actually going to be creating a demo which will be using up these two libraries. The database is created using Room, and it has three entities, which is the user and the age and the sex. So Room generates the corresponding SQLite table at runtime. Let's get to understand what is Room. Room is a persistence library that provides an abstraction layer over SQLite to allow fluent database access while harnessing the full power of the SQLite. So this is actually going to take away a lot of boilerplate when it comes to creating your database, when you talk about your contract, the entry and binding all those values together. So Room is actually going to get that done for you easily. So we're actually going to be doing that in this application, and I'll be adding straight to Android Studio where I have the source, and I'll be brushing it through on how to actually integrate Rxjava Room into an SQLite database. Start up with a build Gradle. This is Android 3.1. You can use 3.0 version. The For older Android version, I will implore you to actually upgrade to the latest Android Studio, so you could actually harness all functionality of what this framework actually expose. So cool. We have the dependencies here, where you have the support designs, the Rxjava. If you can notice, we have the Rxjava 2 and the Rx Android all intact, and the text compile, where you have the JUnit, AppCrest, and so on, all set up with the app compact, the support app compact. So we have that set up. Now let's look at the layout file, the activity user XML. That's actually going to be the launcher UI, where we're going to be able to understand what this whole app structure is actually looking at. We have three different edit texts for the username, the age, and the sex. So we are expecting user input with that, and a button called the update user. So it's actually going to update the edit text input, and is actually going to depict them right there in a text view. So after a text view as well, that is actually going to stand for each of these field, the username, age, and sex. So you have this three text view up there. So we're actually going to insert those values into the database, and at the same time we could update. And if you it keeps changing the values once you strike the update key. So you have that set up, and we'll be looking at the implementation when it comes to the old Java structure. This is like a new way to actually create your environment when you want to build Java applications, or when you want to build on Android applications that are complex and robust. So this is like a new form of approach that is actually being developed by our good friends there in Google, and you have to actually embrace it, and it's quite rich and embedded. So we're actually going to be using the DAO, which is the data abstract object, to actually get all data connection done. We have two sub packages, the persistence and the UI. The UI stands for what could actually be visible to the user, where the persistence is all encompass the data, when we have the local data, the POJO, which is the entity, and we have the user DAO, the data abstraction, and the database itself. So I'm actually going to start from the persistence, where we're going to have the view of how the local user data source is going to look like. We are going to be using Room database as the data source, where you have that implements the user data source, and the final field called user DAO, that's user data abstract object, and you have the constructor right there. So you need to override three methods: the flowable, which is to get the user, and the insert or update user, and the delete all users. So once you implement the user data source, it's actually going to override those three methods. So that takes us down to the user data source that is being implemented from the local user data source. Now in this interface, you need to access the points for managing the user data. Firstly, you get the user using the flowable and passing the user entity. We get to look at what these entities encompasses, and at the same time you could insert the user into the data source using the insert or update user. So it's either it inserts a new user or it updates what is happening right there in the database. So you could also delete if you need that. So that's just the basic CRUD implementation: create, read, update, and delete. Cool. And from here we'll get to look at the user entity. Let's get to look at what we are looking at: the immutable model class for a user. We have the primary key, so you don't really need to declare your contract, declare your entry, and calling on DB helper to keep binding to create a table. The room library is actually going to take heed of that. The only thing you need to set up is the entity you need. That's the fields. What are you looking at? Like for example, in this demo, we're looking at the user ID. Definitely, that's going to be a primary key, as you've seen, and it shouldn't be null. We have that set up at first. The second field is the username, and the third is the age, while the fourth is going to be the sex. So these are the fields that will be included in the table. So that's cool. So you just set that up in the user entity right there, and you have the constructors that could call these different fields, which could manipulate it, could set it, and could get values from there. You have the username, age, sex. That's the first constructor, which could be ignored, but cool. And these are the initialization for those fields. And you have another constructor right there, which is actually taking cognizance of the ID at this time. So that's just the only change from the first constructor you have up there. So this also initializing the fields with the values which will be passed into it. So we have the get method to get the ID, to get the age, the sex, and get the username, which returns their appropriate values. Cool. I hope we understand how that flow. Now let's look at the user data abstract objects. So this is a data access object, which you could also call it, which is actually going to serve as a table. Firstly, we need to get the user. So you get the user from the table. Since the simplicity, we only have one user. We have 3 users in the database. This query gets all the users from the table, but limits the result to just the first user. Fine, that's the limit key which you've actually added here. So it's just going to have the first user. It's not creating multiple users. So you could actually allow for multiple users. So you could you could call right there from the background, probably using the loader manager to actually fetch all the users from the database. Still the same flow of the kind of architecture we've been used to. Now we're getting all the user, but at this point we're only getting the first user, which is the by using the limit key here. We only select the first user. Now for the insert user, you insert the user to the database. If the user already exists, it replaces. Just like this is just like the DB helper that we used to know, where you're going to actually create a table. You're going to actually upgrade the table by deleting what you have and replacing it with the new values. Now we have the delete from the users table. So you could also delete the values that you have right there in the users table. We check the users database. This is the room database that contains the users table. Now it extends the room database, if you could see, and you can have a version of your database called 1, just like what you used to have in your DB helper. You have the user database, that's the instance, and the user DAO, which we've actually looked at, the data access objects. You have the user database constructor right there, which get the instance and call the room to create the database builder. I'm actually going to create your database with the name of sample DB. Cool. You've been able to create your database with this class, which is the user database that extends the room database. So you have all that right there in the persistence. You could see that there's no much boilerplates code that we are actually looking at. So you just focus on the logic of what your database is going to do. Are you deleting? Are you updating? Are you So you create the fields. From the fields, the room database will know the kind of table to create. And if you should notice from the user, I'll put more focus on this class. You've been able to create a primary key, so you could also specify different they call it constraints right there on the fields of what you're actually creating in the SQLite database. Excuse me. You could have the primary key. You could have auto increment if you desire. You could have null or not null. You could even have a unique key. You could have a foreign key, and so on. Specify on these fields. So this is where the whole bulk of abstraction takes place, and the user database creates that using the room database library to actually make that quite easy for you. Cool. Now we have the injection that actually inject the data source, and that enables the injection of data source to the view. And we have the user data source. I've actually talked about that earlier. Now let's look at the UI, which is actually what is going to be visible to the user or to someone using the application. Firstly, talk about the user activity, which is the launcher that extends the app compact activity, as we all know. And this is where you call all the fields from the layout and you initialize them. We have the text view that we actually needed to actually speed out or to show all the name, the age, and the sex. The edit text that takes in inputs values from the user, and the button, which will be struck to actually insert those values into SQLite database. We have the view model factory that is actually going to enable upward compatibility with others views. The view model, this is the binder, just like what we used to have in the adapter that binds data or binds value to the view, and that's cool. In the onCreate method, the same flow we used to know. You set the content view, you initialize all fields right there, and if you notice, you provide the model factory. We'll talk about the view model factory later on, and I would like us to look at how we were able to set the onClick listener. And at this point in time, what happens? You trigger the update username method. So this method is right there over here. It's a private method which can only be called from the user activity. And what's actually going to happen? You've been able to get all the values from the fields of the username, age, and sex. You have that right there in the string variables. And now you disable the update button. So until the username update has been done. Cool. After that, you need to subscribe to updating the username, and you re-enable the button once the username has been updated. How are you going to subscribe to that? You call the disposable. The M disposable is actually coming from the Rxjava, which is actually going to listen, which we have here from the composite disposable by instantiating the class called composite disposable from the Rxjava library. And now you add up to it. You add the view model. You call the update username. We'll get to look at this right there in the. We should have it right there in the local. Well, we have the update username. Cool. Or we have it somewhere in the user view model. Yeah, where we're going to update the username. We're going to talk about this class shortly, but I'll just have to look at a method right in here because we have this model that extends the view model. Very important. And now there's a method from the completable class that completes when the username is being updated. That's the data is being updated. Now it takes in 3 parameters: the username, user age, and the sex. And this returns a completable from the action because you're actually going to subscribe to it. That if there's no user, it's going to create a new user. If we have a user already, then since the user is object immutable, it's going to create a new user with the ID of the previous user and update the username, age, sex, just like what we have. So now it's instantiating a new user object, and you have to pass that because of the constructor we have in the user model. And the second one, we have 2 constructors, if you remember. The first constructor without an ID, while the second one with an ID. So you have that right there, and it's insert or update the user into the data source. So it's just like inserting into the SQLite database that you used to issue out, DB insert. And this time you're calling the data source, which we've add right there from the user data source. as you've seen, the user data source, an object, and from here you could issue out a method called insert or update the user, and you could actually get that triggered. So that's actually updating the username, age, and sex. From the user activity, you get that done, and you subscribe on the scheduler IO, and you observe on the Android scheduler on the main thread, since you want that to be done instantly and you need a view to be generated from there. You need to do that on the main thread, and you subscribe also to the update button to set that enabled to true, and if there is probably an error, you could actually log that to the console and for debug purpose. So that's for the update user method, username, age, sex button. Once that has been struck, so you could actually add a level of validity. Probably you don't need an empty field in your database, so you could actually make if the username is empty, you should return. That means, or you should pop out a message that please fill out your username, fill out your age, fill out so sex, and so on. We all know that validity when you're trying to create a form. So now on start, probably when you are starting up the application, probably you've started another application and you're returning back to the app, that's you need to subscribe to the emission of the username, age, and sex, which is actually called from the view model, and you update the username text view, the age text view, and the sex text view at every on next emission. In case if there's an error, you log that to the console. So how are you going to do that? You call the disposable one more time by adding the view model. Now the view model could get the username, could get the user age, could get the user sex. You've created that right there, the user view model. Let's get to look at it. So you get the username of the user through the flowable, which is going to emit every time the username has been updated, which is the get username method. And what this is going to do is going to get the user, which is the global, since you're getting the user as a whole, and now it returns the get username. That's the user, which is actually right there from the user model. We have the get username over here, so it returns that value right there in the user view model. So you're going to have the value of the username. The same thing applicable to the user age. It gets the age. We have that right there in the user model class, and you could also get the sex. So cool. With that, you could actually return the values of the age, sex, and username. We've talked about the update username when we are trying to strike on the button to actually add to the SQLite database. So cool. This is just an introduction to Room. Room has come to stay, and we implore you to start to lay hands on it. It's actually going to make your coding more easy, and it's actually for a level, at least an intermediate level. You should be able to start using Room if you've been familiar with the whole data structure of the SQLite database, how to create a contract, how to create an entry, how to create the SQLite open helper, how to actually create a table, at the same time manipulate values from the SQLite database, which is just like a relational database. So Room is just an abstract on top of the SQLite database. Still, the SQLite database is still functioning, but you have less boilerplate code to undo and deal with. So this is actually going to give room to a complex development of Android application. And the beauty of it now is it could actually be integrated with Rxjava, which could be subscribed to the model at runtime. So this is not actually going to lag behind. It's actually going to speed out values at runtime. So that's the beauty of Room and Rxjava. So this is an introduction to it. As I've said, I'll be showing the screencast of the video of the app, which you are actually going to see how we've been interacting with the application. And I will also implore you to lay your hands on the source code. This is actually going to help you a lot, and it's going to actually set you rolling in using Room and Rxjava. In the Android manifest, I think we have not much thing to talk about. We only have the user activity, which is the launcher, set up as the launcher. Cool. With that, I'll be answering out. I'll be saying thank you very much for hanging out with me throughout this video, and please strike on that button, subscribe to my channel, and have a blessed time. Bye bye for now.